the limits of human behavior. In our early discussion of what is possible for man, we say that a person is stuck with his character, that he can't evolve beyond it or without it. If there's a limit to what a man can be, we can now also must conclude that there is a limit even to what religious therapy can do for him. But the psychotherapy religionists are claiming just the opposite, that the life force can miraculously emerge from nature, can transcend the body it uses as a vehicle, and can break the bounds of human character. They claim that man as he now is can be merely a vehicle for emergence of something completely new. A vehicle that can be transcended by a new form of human life. Many of the leading figures in modern true thought slip into such mystic, such eschatology of immanence, and which the insight of nature will erupt into a new being. Jung wrote such argument in his answer to Job. The answer to the layman of Job was that man's condition would not always be the same, because a new man would break out the womb of creation. Erich Fromm once lamented that it is a wonder that more people are not insane. Seems life is such a terrible burden. And then he went on to write a book with the title, You Shall Be as God. God verging on insanity, one must assume. Fortunately, there's no need for us to take up the metaphysical aspect of this problem. It is now the center of a passionate and at the same time coolly intellectually reviewed by some of our best critical minds, not only by Rev, but also Leon Tring and now John Passmore in an important historical critical work. It can be all summed up in the simplest and sharpest term. How can an ego-controlled animal change its structure? How can a self-conscious creature change the dilemma of its existence? There's simply no way to transcend the limit of human condition or to change the psychological structure condition that makes humanity possible. What does it mean for something new to emerge from such an animal to triumph over his nature? Even though man has repeated such a notion since the most ancient time and the most subtle and weirdest way. Even though whole movement of social action as though has been inspired by such idea, still they are merely fancy, as Passmore have well reminded us. I myself has been formed on using idea like the developing spirit of man and the promise of new birth, but I don't think I ever meant them conjuring up a new creature. Rather, I was thinking more of a new birth bringing new adaptation, new creative solution to our problem, a new openness in dealing with stale perception about reality, new form of art, music, literature, architecture that would be continual transformation of reality. But behind it all would be the same type of revolutionary creature making his own peculiar response to world that continue to transcend him. If psychotherapists and scientists lap into metaphysical so easily, we should not blame theologians for doing the same. But ironically, theologians today are often the most sober about immanence and its possibility. Consider Paul Tillich. He too has metaphysics of new being, the belief in the emergence of a new type of person who would be more in harmony with nature, less driven, more perspective, more in touch with his own creative energy, and who might go on to form general communication to replace the collective of our time. Communities of true person in place of the objective creature created by our own materialistic culture. But Tillich has fewer illusions about new being than most of the psychotherapeutic religionists. He saw that the idea was actually a myth, an ideal that might work towards so partly realized. It was not a fixed truth about the insight of nature. And the point is crucial, and he honestly put it. The only argument for the truth of this gospel of new being is that message make itself true, or as we should say in the Science and Man, it is an ideal, typical, and joiner. I think the whole question of what is possible for the inner life of man was nicely summed up by Susan Langer in the phrase, the myth of the inner life. She used this term in reference to the experience of music, but it seems to apply to the whole metaphysics of the unconscious, of the emergence of new energy from the heart of nature. But let us quickly add that the use of the term myth is not meant to be disparaging or to reflect symbol illusion. As Langer explained, some myths are vegetative. They generate real conceptual power, real apprehension of dim truth, some kind of global abomination of what we mean by sharp analytical reason. Most of all, as William James and Tillich have argued, belief about reality affects people's real action. They help introduce the new into the world, especially is this true for belief about man, about human nature, and about what man may yet become. If something influences our effort to change the world, then to some extent, it might change the world. This helps explain one of the things that persuade us about psychoanalytic prophets like Erich Fromm. We wonder how they can so easily forget about the dilemmas of human condition that tragically limits man's effort. The answer is, on one level, that they have to leave tragedy behind as part of a program to awaken some kind of hopeful, creative effort by man. Fromm has nicely argued that the Darwinian thesis that, as reality is partly the result of human effort, the person who prides himself on being a hard-headed realist and refrain from helpful action is really advocating the human task. The essence of human effort, vision, and hope in order to shape reality seems to me largely to exonerate from the charges that he is really a rabbi at heart, who is impelled to redeem man and cannot let the world be. If the alternative is fatalistic acceptance of the present human condition, then each of us is a rabbi, or had better to be. But once we say that, once we make a pragmatic argument for creative myth, it does not mean let us go the hook so easily about the nature of the real world. It only makes us more uncomfortable with the therapeutic religionists. If you are going to have a myth of new being, then like Tillich, you will have to use this myth as a call to your highest and most difficult effort, and not to simple joy. A creative myth is not simply a relapse into comfortable illusion. It has to be as bold as possible in order to be truly generative. What singles out Tillich's cognition about new being is that there is no nonsense here. Tillich means that the man too have the courage to be himself, to stand on his own feet, to face up to the eternal contradiction of the world. The broad goal of this kind of courage is to absorb into one's own being the maximum amount of non-being. As a being, as an extension of all the being, man has an organismic impulsion to take into his own organization the maximum amount of problematic of life. His daily life then becomes truly a duty of cosmic preparation, and his courage to face the anxiety of meaningless become a true cosmic heroism. No longer does one to do God's will set over against some imaginary figures in heaven. Rather, in one's own person, he's trying to achieve what the creative power of emergence being have themselves so far achieved with lower forms of life. The overcoming of that which will negate life. The problem of meaninglessness in the form in which non-being possessed itself in our time, then, say Tillich, the task of conscious being at the height of the evolution destiny is to meet and vanquish the new emergent obstacle to the sentient life. In this kind of ontology of immanence of the new being, what we are describing is not a creature who is transformed, but who transformed the world in turn in some miraculous way, but rather a creature who takes more of the world into himself and develops new form of courage and endurance. It is not very different from the Attilian ideal as expressed in the Odyssey, or from what is meant to be Kant to be a man. At least this is the ideal for some kind of man. It shows why Tillich's myth of being truly centered on one's own energy is a radical one. It points to all the evasion of centeredness of the man, always being part of something or someone else, sheltering one's in alien power. Transference, even after we admit its necessary and ideal dimension, reflects some universal betrayal of man's own power, which is why he is always submerged by the large structure of society. He contributes to the very thing that enslaved him, the critique of guru therapies which comes to rest here. You can't talk about an idea of freedom in the same breath you willingly give it up. The fact turns chorister against the east, just as is also less Tillich argues so penetratively that Eastern mythicism is not for Western man. It is an invasion of the courage to be it. It prevents the absorption of maximum meaninglessness onto oneself. Tillich's point is that mythical experience seems to be near to perfect fate, but it is not. Mythicism lacks precisely the element of skepticism, and skepticism is a more radical experience, a more manly confrontation of potential meaninglessness. Even more, we must not forget that much of the time, mythicism, as popularly practiced, is fused with a sense of magical omnipotence. It is actually a maniac, defense, and a denier of creaturelessness. Again, we are talking about the highest ideal things, which always seems most unreal. But how can we settle for less? We need the boldest creative myth, not only to urge man on, but also to perhaps especially to help men see the reality of their condition. We have to be as hard-headed as possible without reality and possibility. From this point of view, we can see that therapeutic revolution raises two great problems. The first is how matured, critical, and somber these liberated people will be. How much have they pushed in the direction of general freedom? How much have they avoided the real world and its problem? Their own bitter paradox. How much have they hitched on their liberation by still holding on to others, to illusion or to certaintiness? If the Freudian revolution in the modern thought can mean anything at all, it must be that it brings to birth a new level of introspection as well as social criticism. We already see that reflected not only in academic intellectual awareness, but also even in the popular mind, in the letters and advice column of mass circulation newspaper, where 35 years ago, could you read an advice to the love-lorn that cautions a girl against her boyfriend who refused for moral reason to make love to her as she asked him to, because he might be projecting onto her his own impotence? But this brings up a second great problem raised by the therapeutic revolution, namely, so what? Even with numerous group of really liberated people, at their best, we can't imagine that the world will be any pleasanter or less tragic at a place. It may be even worse in still an unknown way, as Tillich warns us, new being under the condition and limitation of existence will only bring into play new and sharper paradox, new tension, and more painful disharmony, a more intense demonism. Reality is a remorseless because God do not walk upon the earth, and if man could become noble repository of great gulf of non-being, there would have been less peace than we obviously and driven madman has today. Besides, can any ideal or therapeutic revolution touch the vast masses of the globe, this modern mechanical man in Russia and near billion sheep-like follower in China? The brutalized and ignorant population of almost every continent, when no one lives in the liberation atmosphere of Berkeley, California, or in the intoxication of small doses on unconstriction in the therapeutic group in one's hometown. One is living in a hothouse atmosphere that shuts out the reality of the rest of the planet, the way things really are in the world. It is the therapeutic megalomania that must quickly be seen through if we have not been perfect fools. The empirical facts of the world will not fade away because one have analyzed its odious complex, as Freud so well known, or because one can make love with the tenderness, as so many now believe. Forget it. In this sense again, it is Freudian sober pessimism, especially of his later writings such as Civilization as its dense content, that keeps him temporary. Men are doomed to live in an overwhelmingly tragic and demonic world.